sir, for your words of wisdom. I would now request Advocate Scientific Sir to please continue.
I'll try and stick to the 20-minute limit. For the better part of my career, I spent practicing as a litigant in the sphere of intellectual property rights. So I've seen how rights and duties work in close action from that standpoint. And since, although this discussion is happening in the backdrop of constitutional law, the title of the topic itself is only rights and duties in current perspective. I'm just building on a few points that Sir made. Try and read this beautiful book called The Startup Nation, Israel, by Dan Senner and Saul Singer. It's a beautiful book which actually captures the role of the Israeli Defense Forces in building the character and the state of Israel as we know it today. And the role played by IDF in producing entrepreneurs, generals, presidents, prime ministers, whatnot. Now, perhaps it's easy for us to say that because they have a mandatory conscription policy, they have derived certain benefits from it. But why did they have to come out with that policy? That historical context is slightly important for the simple reason that Jews as a community were pushed to the brink of extinction almost. 6 million people lost in one fell swoop in a period of 6 years from 39 to 45. So until you're pushed to the brink of extinction, perhaps you don't know your duties. You're only bothered about your rights. That's perhaps one way of looking at it. As long as you have the benefit of breathing the free air of oxygen or the oxygen of freedom, you will continue to be individualistic in your approach, and all you'll think of is your rights and your entitlements. So I'm drawing from one statement that that the advisor of my law school actually said, Professor Anil Mitra, who was the second Vice Chancellor of NLU Delhi and the founding Vice Chancellor of NLU Jodhpur, NLU Bangalore, that we have not shed enough blood in the process of securing our independence, which is perhaps the reason that it remains a distant memory, relegated to the margins of school textbooks, and which we take for granted. And consequently, everything has to be looked at only from a right standpoint. If, let's say, a government of this country, if at all it musters the political will to introduce compulsory military conscription, it will be the most unpopular government this country would have ever seen. It will be booted out of power, notwithstanding the fact that there may be certain benefits to it. The words used will be fascist, dictator, authoritative, this and that will be the end of it. Why? So and I find it really difficult to discuss any constitutional discussion or any constitutional discourse without getting into politics. I can't do that. And so I'll be blunt and politically incorrect, whatever be the consequences. So the more you push to let's say, the more you have a pro-rights discussion, you're seen as a liberal. And the more you insist on duties, you're seen as a conservative and pro-establishment stooge. That will be the label that we tag to you. None of these discussions today are devoid of branding. None of these discussions are possible without you being accused of one label or the other. You will never be able to have an objective discussion. So the best way is, fine, I don't want an objective discussion, let's have a debate. Because an objective discussion will never be given the benefit of the doubt. You'll always be forced to take one side or the other. If that's the case, I might as well take a side and I will say, yes, I'm right on this for these reasons. Now, this is important because I'll just offer what Sir has just said. Look at it. Everything that you have as a duty under Part 4A, in order for it to find some kind of favor and legitimacy, you have to necessarily push it under the rights bracket for you to be able to enjoy it. It has come to that point. It has come to the point where the concept of duty fundamentally is equated with discipline and therefore dictatorship and fascism. That's where we find ourselves today. Why is that the case? There's a reason for it. To hope that Indians, forget everybody else or any other human being, Indians will perhaps be able to, let's talk of only the current part of Indians. We can never be sure what was the character of our forefathers and ancestors. That's very difficult. You'll only be speculating. But the current lot will never be able to do anything on their own simply because something is right. You'll need a sanction, you'll need a danda somewhere. Either positive or negative, an incentive or a disincentive. How many of us are aware of let's say, a good cross section of individuals who do something simply because it is right or wrong, as opposed to wondering what is in it for me. If the answer is in the negative, clearly the push has to come from the state. Now, the state is in the hands of a government which is ultimately the result of a popular vote. So which government will have the guts, the gumption to push for something which is unpopular? Very difficult. So I have always believed that some of these things will be introduced through external forces which are external even to that of India. You want to cut down the number of holidays, increase the work hours, then you have to keep pace with competing countries who have better productivity, then you have no other option but to cut down on your holidays. If you want to fight the discussion of reservation in the private sector, then somebody else should say, sorry, we will not entertain this and we will not invest in this country if this is the policy that's going to be introduced. Only then you'll start having an introspection on your policies. Therefore, if we decide to leave the aspect of duty to one fine day when India will all of a sudden grow a conscience, or all Indians will grow a conscience, that is never going to happen. You will have to necessarily try and find legal justifications, political justifications, couch it as an incentive to push it down the throats of a few people, and after a few generations, it will become a habit. Then you'll get used to it. If all of us are under the impression that military conscription was popular in Israel from day one and continues to be popular, sorry, that's not the case at all. Orthodox Jews, the Haredis, even today, are the only community in Israel who are exempt from military conscription. But then, all other communities are saying, our children go and they die at war fronts. How are you an exception? Why should you be an exception? So the rest of Israel has started taking this duty for granted, and it is now coercing one community which treats itself as an exception to toe this line. Societal pressure today is the consequence of state pressure at some point of time. Therefore, what does this require you to do? Recraft the concept of what you think a state must do, can do, should do. If you think of a state as only a provider of basic facilities and infrastructure with no say on anything moral, ethical, human, and something which is not strictly legal, then effectively you're going to have a laissez-faire approach where rights will always prevail over duties. Any interference by the state on issues and taking a position on what is right and wrong, you will automatically say, what is your business talking about? How dare you talk about it? It's not your business at all. I smoke to any length I want, I die, what is your problem? Why do you come out with these advertisements? I will do whatever I wish to do. That, according to me, is the charam seema of the rights discourse. And you would have pushed the balance entirely to the opposite direction. If you want a live example, the worst example that I think anybody has known in recent experience is 93rd Amendment, right to education. That's the worst piece of legislation ever. Forget that it targets one community, another community, we can twist this into a communal discourse. But from a strictly legal, economic justification standpoint, I can't understand how is this even allowed. How do you push the state's duties or a collective duty on a handful of schools and expect them to do what the state is otherwise supposed to be doing? So what this does is, as opposed to the state focusing on its role in providing better quality of education through state-run schools, that responsibility and that blame has been passed on to private institutions who are expected to bear the brunt of this damned piece of legislation. Not a blessed piece of legislation, it's a damned piece of legislation. You will see the ill effects of it. You've already started seeing the effects of it. You will see this even more in a more devastating fashion. Which philanthropist will have the incentive to start a school when faced with this kind of a legislation? So you should read the privacy judgment. About 15 rights have been enumerated as rights which have been carved out and distilled from Article 21. And the latest is this blessed piece of legislation, RT. Food ke liye right de do, sab ke liye right de do. Where is the infrastructure going to come from? You'll end up eating rabbits like Venezuela. Without the money, although being an oil-rich country. So let's look at it this way. Look at it from a political and let's say institutional action reaction standpoint. One blessed lady comes out with the 42nd Amendment. May she rest in peace. So since she decides to come out with this amendment, judiciary says, ठीक है, 2 साल तक तो बैठेंगे, उसके बाद देखते हैं क्या होता है. So it comes out, and then they say, it may have been introduced, but it is not binding. So you dilute what she has done. That is how, from a political perspective, you interpret the institutional pushback to the 42nd Amendment to say, you may have introduced it, but it is not at par with Part 3, and consequently it's not justiciable. Now, look at it from an apolitical standpoint. I refuse to buy a point of view which says that everything that came as a consequence of the emergency was wrong or evil. Emergency itself was an evil. But then who is to say that good cannot come out of evil? You never know that. You ask the people who lived in those times, they'll say, "Chalo bhai, train to time pe chalta tha." For someone to whom that matters, it makes a difference. Even today, there are people who travel all the way from Valsad in Gujarat to Bombay every day in the morning and go back to work in the evening. So those people, it would make a difference, wouldn't it? Because you're going to judge what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad only from your standpoint. You're still an Indian. That incentive structure is not going to be right? So there may be parts of, let's say, the emergency, there may be parts of what was affected in the Constitution as a consequence of the emergency, which are downright non-justiciable, cannot be justified due to any prism. But there are certain parts which should have been justiciable. Why? Today, thanks to that blessed finding, you're not able to enforce a uniform civil code in this country because it's part of Part 4. Look at the consequence. The end which you wish to achieve, which you believe is in the good of the society, is part of something which came through evil, which you have said is not justiciable. So what is good, what is bad is a question of timeline kitna lamba hai. May have been bad then is bad today. Or may have been good then is bad today. So if we were to step back, look at it from a historical standpoint, try to be more philosophical about it, we'll say perhaps we shouldn't have given a knee-jerk reaction to everything that came out of the emergency. If we had said some parts are non-justiciable, some aren't, perhaps we would have been able to push something like the Uniform Civil Code and whatnot. So as far as I am concerned, it's time that the balance is set right and it goes to the other way. We have gone so far into the rights discourse that the concept of duty has become alien and it's no more music to our ears, it's a curse. It's a swear. And this is not going to happen, and you will not be in a position to actually change this discourse, hoping that someday all of us will wake up and say, "Main apna kaam theek karunga to sab theek ho jayega." That's not going to happen. That there will always be only a limited number of people who think on those lines. And even if, let's say, that you were to increase the scope of this discussion beyond India, by and large, most economists, let's say philosophers have always said, people will look out for their interests first. And that is the fundamental reason why you need a state, so that if everybody decides to drive in their own direction, how do you control the traffic? So you've seen that advertisement, that billboards near the Delhi High Court, where they show lane pe chala, so they show a list of a host of ants in 2 different lanes going in different directions. Ants going in different directions is a consequence of only rights prevailing. The necessity of a lane exists because the state has the duty and the power to ensure that people go in the right direction and they don't collide with each other. Therefore, as far as I am concerned, state as a vehicle and as a facilitator and the source of all rights and the source of only rights is a concept that needs to be revisited. Unless and until duty becomes important. So Israel is not the only country with compulsory conscription. Singapore equally has this issue. Even they do this. Yes. So no, that's a very politically incorrect example. Don't get it. The worst part is, today, if my position has some semblance of, let's say, an echo in, let's say, Donald Trump's position, they'll say he's a Trump tag. If I take a position with respect to illegal immigration in this country, which I have in the Rohingya petition, if I were to take that position, they'll say, look at him, he's like Trump. That will be the end of all debate. whether that position has a basis in law, whether that position has a basis in the principle of non-refoulement, whether that position has a basis in the Foreigners Act, all of that will be chucked into the bully bin, thrown out of the window, thrown to the winds. Because branding has become our way of debating. He's a leftist, he's a rightist, he's center, he's right, he's a Sanghi, he's this and that. No, the debate then is there. Whether that position is capable of being assessed on its own merits and can you use it for some common good. Surely the right can't be right on everything, the left can't be right on everything. Not possible. So as far as I'm concerned, you need to think of this in the larger context as to whether it has come to a point. Let's look at it this way. There are any number of cinema halls that I've been to, not that I'm that jobless, I'm just saying, that whenever the national anthem is played, there will be one arrogant fellow sitting there saying, it has come to that point. You stare, you keep staring, it doesn't make a difference. You glare at him, it doesn't make a difference. And if I were to raise my hand, I'll become the unpopular fellow, with the family and with others also. Movie dekhne hai, kya kar rahe hain pe? So somebody else has to enforce this. The theatre will not do it because he is losing a potential patron. Why will he do it? Incentive. Theatre नहीं करेगा तो आप पे बैन लगेगा. तो करो. Cinema चलाना या इस आदमी को यहाँ पे बिठाने. That's the way to go about it. At the end of the day, look at it this way. The discussion around, let's say, national anthem, as Sir rightly said, the discussion around settlement of illegal immigrants, the discussion around uniform civil code, each of these aspects fundamentally hinges on your position towards rights and duties. Therefore, for me, of all the topics that have been discussed today, not because I am a part of this topic, I think this topic is perhaps most relevant because that will decide your moral compass or your compass towards rights and duties. And consequently, what impact will this generation have and this discussion have in the next set of rights and duties that are carved out in the next 15 or 20 years. Thank you.